Hello, and welcome to another episode of All the Things. I am Monique Duson.
And I am Krista Bontrager, also known as Theology Mom.
This is the show where we talk about all the things related to God, the Bible, and real life. We are in the same location. If anyone is wondering, Krista has come out to invade, take over Phoenix. And yeah, you've been here for a little while.
Well, I was thinking maybe I could just do a role reversal and be the house guest that never leaves.
You know?
Since you lived with us for 5 years, maybe I could just get stuck here.
Oh,
No,
in case you guys do not know, I am Monique Duson, who does not do long-term house guests.
she barely likes people.
This is true. This is true. And I don't see anything wrong with that. That is how the Lord has made me. It is okay. But yes, you came here mid last week and you head home tomorrow.
Tomorrow,
It's been a good time.
yeah, stayed
Good
extra
time.
days so we could do the show together live and in person. And looking forward to this conversation. I do want to give a shout out to our moderators. Thanks for helping us out today. Let us know in the chat if you are watching and where you're watching from. So,
Yes. Now, I feel like the weather gods have been, if there were such a thing,
there's no
have
such
been
thing.
have been very good to you. It has not been that hot.
Yeah,
You
today
should
was,
thank Phoenix. Thank me. It's okay.
yeah, today's a balmy 83 degrees here in Phoenix. It's very nice. It's
We
very
didn't even
pleasant.
make it. I think we only made it to 100 one day while you were here.
Yeah.
I want to encourage you guys to stay tuned for a very important announcement that we will have later on regarding our upcoming program this fall, our ambassador program.
Yep.
And I also want to remind everyone, we said it last week as we opened the show, but this season on All the Things, we are focusing on justice and different issues related to justice. How do we as believers consider issues of justice, issues that we may not necessarily see as a justice issue? And then how do we approach those things from a biblically centered or a Christ centered position, not just, oh, this is a justice issue. What is the culture saying? How do we grapple with issues that are happening in culture, but from a historically Christian perspective?
Yeah, and today we're really focusing on a question of what happens when ideas come into the classroom, whether that's in higher education or even in our children's K to 12 education, when ideas are rooted in progressive ideology, what does that look like? But how can we, as Christians and as parents, respond carefully, thoughtfully, but not just getting so wrapped up in our emotions that we're no good to anybody? So, how can we think those things through?
Yeah, so our guest today is the one and only Dr. Corey Miller. He is a philosopher, he is an apologist, he is the president of Ratio Christi, and he's written a new book, the Progressive Miseducation of America. And what he does in this book is nothing short of a miracle how much he wraps up in this book, looking at history, looking at where we are currently, how did we get here, but what's going on in our educational space, and how does what's happening in our educational space also bleed out into the culture? How do Christians have a voice, use our voice, our vote, and our dollar to be able to speak into those issues? It's so well done. I have greatly appreciated his book. And we are going to talk with him today just about education and this miseducation. Now, see, when I think about the miseducation, I think about that album by Lauryn Hill, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. And that's what I keep wanting to say, but it's not that, you guys.
Not that.
Not that. It is the progressive miseducation of America. And so let's bring on Corey. He's also on our academic advisory council. He is currently on a speaking tour. He does a lot of work with TPUSA. I want to say TPUSA Faith, and has spoken for them. He's just good folk.
He's been a good friend to us.
He's good people. So let's welcome on Corey.
Ladies, it is great to be here with you and looking forward to the show. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Now, for the few people who may not know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about Ratio Christi?
Sure. Background that propelled me into where I'm at today was my seventh generation history with Mormonism. And that gave me, through my conversion to Christ, the historical, biblical, traditional view of Jesus, passion for truth to be able to know that, the Bible was historically reliable, that God existed, and which God it was that existed, because I'd been deceived my whole life. And so for a period of time, I became a skeptic. But once I got really established in the faith, I was off and running. My heart of hearts was evangelism, but I wanted to reach strategically at the highest levels. And so I did several graduate degrees, eventually culminating in PhD work at Purdue and then the University of Aberdeen in philosophy, and taught for a dozen years at Indiana University. But when I completed my PhD from Aberdeen, I got a call from Ratio Christi. This was about 11 years ago. They had an opening, and so I took it. And Ratio Christi means the reason of Christ. It is a Christ-centered campus ministry focused intently on equipping students and professors to give historical, philosophical, and scientific reasons for following Jesus. So we want to be about thoughtful Christianity. We want to see lives transformed on the campus, the most influential institution shaping civilization, so that we can see culture changed as well.
In your naming of your book, The Miseducation of, or The Progressive Miseducation, I'm wondering, why not a different word? Like, why miseducation versus something like misguidance? You know what I mean? Like, to me, it seems like being the progressive miseducation is a very intentional type of wording. And I'm just wondering, what is it that you are looking to call out specifically in using that wording?
Right. So from the Latin educere, it means to impart knowledge, skills, and so forth. Guidance is a little bit weaker, but when we think about knowledge historically, going all the way back to Plato, we think about justified true belief. So for something to be knowledge, to impart knowledge, it has to be believed, it has to be true, and it has to have some kind of warrant or justification or evidence behind it. Well, in my dissertation, I looked at the good life through the eyes of Aristotle in the Greek tradition, Maimonides in the Jewish tradition, and in Aquinas in the Christian tradition. And most of those people had writings that was about education. Specifically, they used the term guide, like Maimonides had his most famous book, The Guide of the Perplexed. That was his most famous philosophical book. And it was very much like his philosophical predecessor in the Greek tradition, Aristotle, who wrote the Nicomachean Ethics. And in both cases, and Aquinas then followed them in it, in both cases, they had a group of, say, younger people who were inclined toward the good life already. It wasn't people who were aversive toward it. They already had a kind of a sense of which direction to go in life, but they wanted to come along and be a guide, someone to help them philosophically reflect and reinforce the beliefs that they were already now inclined toward. Education historically is similar to that. It's imparting knowledge, but there are degrees with that. When you're imparting knowledge for a 2-year-old or 3-year-old, it's more like indoctrination. When they're a 12 or 13 or 14-year-old, that's when they already understand you don't stick your finger in a like socket. Now you teach them rationally, philosophically, scientifically about the beliefs they already hold. And so there's a graduation of this. What's happening in our universities today is just the opposite. You don't go impart knowledge that 2 + 2 = 5. That's not knowledge. That's contrary to the facts. That's a contradiction to the facts. And we're imparting these things. We're not just guiding them. We're imparting knowledge, and it's not even skills of of how to learn, how to think, it's what to think, and it's ideology. It's imparted by sort of by fiat, by um, uh, a large body that has no checks and balances. I posted today on my Facebook wall some new statistics that came out over the last 60 years, seeing how the faculty and academia have moved from, like 45% liberal, 20% conservative, 20% moderate, now down to 75% liberal, and there is no more moderate. They're down to about 12%, and the conservatives are down to about 10. And I think that was generous. I think it's
Mm.
much worse than that. And so you end up in a think tank environment, not challenging belief formation by debate or rational discourse, but by imposing, indoctrinating, almost as you would with 2-year-olds. You don't give them the rationale for why they stick their finger into the sockets. You just tell them don't. It's
Mhm.
authoritative, and you come with moral authoritative knowledge, and there are consequences, steep consequences at that time, differently than when they become young adults or even adult children or something like that, which you graduate levels of education. So we literally are in the midst, the bad education. We are indoctrinating with mass psychosis, I would say,
Mhm.
at the threat of even moderates, even liberals, losing their jobs that they've put decades and decades into. But for survival purposes, they don't even want to speak up. So it makes it seem like everybody there believes the same thing. And because they all have PhDs, there's just something in it's like osmosis, something in the water that just makes it so, and everybody is expected to toe the line and believe it. And if you don't, you're considered a bad person. It's a different kind of education than we've ever had in the university systems. And when I say ever, I mean ever. This is the second ideological revolution that's come through the universities since the Christians started them, but it's never been like this.
I guess that leads me to a very difficult place because I've always been um, very favorable and supportive of helping parents think about education options and where to help coach their teenagers and what schools to consider, and that education is really important and it's an important part of life of growing your mind and everything and developing that. But I have to tell you, in the last couple of years, I've really kind of soured on this idea for a lot of the reasons that you're outlining. And I know that Charlie Kirk became quite critical of whether or not education, higher education in particular, is really even needed or useful anymore, that it's having this actually detrimental effect in tearing apart the fabric and the cohesion of our culture. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that, because, in some vocations, like I'm thinking if you want to become an attorney or you want to become a school teacher, you have to have certain
Right.
degrees and credentialing. If you want to go to medical field, but like, what are your thoughts at this point, given the data that you've collected about thinking through, helping parents think through whether or not higher education is really worth it?
That's a great question. And you're right, with some degrees, medicine, for example, or education going into at least the public sphere, yeah, you've got to have certain credentials. Um, I think it's important for us to recognize that in terms of cultural influence, politics is downstream from culture, culture from education, and the apex of education is the university. So when we think higher education, we think university. That may not always be so. Maybe that will change. Maybe Jordan Peterson's classroom online model will take root, or maybe the liberal atheist thinkers now that are being pushed out of the universities who had their 100-year reign that culminated under Robespierre, the French revolutionary, otherwise known as Richard Dawkins in our time, coming up with the guillotine, tried to guillotine all the religious people, the nobility, and so forth, wipe out God or the gods of Western culture. And then, just like the French Revolution, he got guillotined by his own guillotine and now wants to be our friend, right? Because why? Those people are now getting kicked out of the universities, and the other Revolutionary Guard is coming in now. So we're seeing a literal changing of the guard. Who's at the guarding the unknown tomb in Washington, D.C.? It's the changing of the guard happening right now. And, these people have thought, well, let's start all over. Let's start our own sort of Hillsdale in Austin, Texas, and call it University of Austin. Notice it's in Texas where there's freedom, but it's in the bluest part of Texas in Austin. And they want to have an educational institution that doesn't require or even allow government funding, like what Grove City and Hillsdale and Patrick Henry College have done, so that they don't have any government woke intrusion into the education system. They really want to go back to where we were 30 years ago when they were at the height of their reign. And so they're trying that. Maybe it'll be just all online stuff. Maybe Elon Musk comes up, with a plan or something like that. Whatever the case, we're always going to be wanting to go to where the source of the education is, because everything moves from ideas having consequences, and bad ideas make victims. Good ideas transform lives, societies, and civilization. Right now, the university is still king, and the secular university is still king. You want to have graduates from there, even though you don't like what's happening there. Even the Christian colleges, they would salivate if they had someone who had a PhD from Harvard to be able to put on their website and say, look at me. And that comes with a cost, because you start possibly to drift at that point. And we're aware of some of those things that have happened. And internal professors that have been on committees that have said as much. But nonetheless, prestige still matters. You still have cash value, right? And so parents that are thinking about sending their kids to these places need to first think, do they even need to go? Mm-hmm. Right? It's like the lemmings. That's what we all do now. That's not what always was the case. And in the medievals, or in the classical tradition, you would go get higher education to hone your calling. But if you were going to become a carpenter of all things, or a tent maker or something, you didn't need to go to the university for that. Maybe if you're going to go become a lawyer or something like that, you did, or a professor. But now everybody thinks they need to go to the university, and usually it's the secular university, and the secular university with the greatest name out there, the Ivy Leagues. And those end up being the most dangerous, right? Where the ratio of, I think, Yale in their social sciences and humanities departments, the ratio of liberal to conservative professor is 78-1. And by liberal, it's no longer really liberal. It's postmodern cultural Marxist. Liberals are being kicked out. It's the illiberals that are taking the reign. When you look at the voting ratios, Harvard, they have a 99% ratio of faculty contributions going to Democrats. 99%. Yale is 98%. Princeton's 97%. You go all the way down, all the way through the Ivy Leagues and through Stanford and UCLA. I think UCLA, you get to 89%. And that's finally where you have, the ratio that's less than 90%. And that doesn't mean those people are conservative or even Christian that are part of the 10% there. That just means they're not giving campaign contributions to Democrats. This is what I mean, that this is a monolithic, it's a monopoly, it's an ideology together with blasphemy laws, with thou shalt nots, 10 commandments of words that thou shalt not say. We've litigated in courts over these lexicons that they all have, words that you ought not say, lest you be a hater and lest you lose your position, maybe even your tenure, if that's possible. But parents need to know, if they're going to send their kids to the universities, do they need to go? Do they need to go into that much debt? Is it going to have ROI, return on an investment? If you're going to be an engineer, yes. If you're going into women's studies, no, unless you're going to go right back into the universities. That's the place that's hiring them all. Or in HR departments in the corporate world, they're hiring the women's studies graduates, because then they control all the corporations, which then control everybody's paychecks. So parents need to think about that stuff. But the final thing on that is, you need to do your homework and realize that with those ratios, as bad as they are, on average, 23 to 1 for those just gaining tenure, but worse the higher up you go in the pecking order. With those statistics, pastors and parents and grandparents are not preparing their kids for that. So they are literally paying for the apostasy of their own children and grandchildren. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. You can equip them sufficiently to be able to fend off even that radical, disparate level of the professoriate. They can still stand up against it, because truth is like that and rationality is like that. But it means we have to be equipping them, and we have to send them in tested, battle tested. And that requires some work just before we cut them loose and give them the tuition check and don't see them again until Christmas, the first time, when we suspect something's up, and then we see them Christmas the next time, and now they've got purple hair and they're trans.
That part. Part of what you cover early on in your book is the fact that universities still, like you just said, part of the highest parts of our culture, but they are being intentionally repurposed. I want you to talk just a little bit about that repurposing, because when we get to looking at things like education for grades K through 12, parents are like, something's off with my kid's teacher, but they don't know necessarily what's off, but they are seeing all of these ideological shifts in the classroom. And so I'm going to ask, after you talk about this repurposing of the university, I want to follow up with a question about the K to 12.
Yeah. So when we think about education in general and at the highest levels, maybe someone has an education doctorate or they have a PhD in education, which is, said differently, they have a doctor of philosophy. They're all philosophers at that level. And there are varying, perspectives on the philosophy of education. Aristotle had one, for example, disseminating information into the minds. Plato had another one, a Socratic method of asking thought-provoking questions and leading them, in a fashion down toward the answers. Those were two different philosophies of education. But both Plato and Aristotle and the classical system, including the three great religions that followed them and adopted and adapted Greek and Roman philosophy into their religious systems, they believed that knowledge is possible. In fact, for Christianity, Jesus said that, are you picking me up okay? Okay, Jesus said that the purpose for life is knowledge. John 17:3, the purpose of life is to know God. Plato said the purpose of life is to prepare for death.
Oh.
But that's what we mean. That's your last chance right there, and you're going into the next life to know God intimately or in your own realm, away from God. But knowledge is what we're after. And when we're talking about knowledge, we believe it's justified true belief or something like that. Fast forward to where we're at today, and my book goes through the process of how it evolved to this way and what revolutions happened along the way, ideological revolutions, to get us there. But just fast forward to where we're at today. There is no knowledge today. Knowledge is a social construction of reality. every part of knowledge. And so they call it knowledges, right?
Mhm.
Like 8 billion knowledges, like relativism, radical relativism, collective relativism, cultural relativism, whatever. Truth is no longer something we discover out there, like the correspondence theory of truth. And we would hold that principle in common with even Richard Dawkins of the last revolution. And Dawkins wants to be our friend because we have that in common. But the new Revolutionary Guard doesn't believe what Dawkins believed or what we as Christians believed. There is no truth. And you say, ha ha, is that true? Sounds like a contradiction. They're fine with that so long as they can manipulate it. Knowledge is a social construction of reality. Truth is what my peers will let me get away with, said one current thinker in that area. And so truth is reducible to power. And so if there is no real knowledge to discover out there, and it's stuff that we just collectively come up with, it comes down to power and whatever you think is your truth versus my truth. And whoever has more votes on that, your truth, my truth, that's the way it's going to be. And so that's what's happening in these, educational institutions. Come back and ask that question one more time, Monique, that you had asked. I
Well,
think I've been.
I'm
Sorry.
wondering what is what is the repurposing that
There you go.
you're
Yeah.
referring to? Like, what is the purpose of the repurposing?
Yeah. So the purpose in 1636, just a decade or two after the Puritans landed and they started Harvard, the motto was Veritas, or truth, Latin to English. Within a short period of time, they changed it to Truth for Christ and the Church. And that lasted almost 300 years until 1936, which, as I discuss in my book, was the tail end of that first revolution that was a 50-year fight for the universities. And the dust was settling at that time. And then the new purpose was no longer, it didn't include what it did before, where you're discovering reality out there. You are learning about the good life, and then the same person in every university would teach the capstone class on moral philosophy, and it was the president who was also a member of the clergy. And that person would teach them about the good life and give them moral philosophy before they graduated them, before they gave them the commencement and sent them out to be good citizens in the world. After that first revolution, there was a division between moral truth and scientific truth. Science was all there is, was, or ever will be in terms of knowledge, because nature is all there is, was, or ever will be in that first worldview revolution that took place. But now it's not even just scientific facts or the scientific method. Those things are often looked at as, white imperialist oppressive methodologies to keep minoritized groups out of power.
Mhm.
Now there's a new purpose. It's not just scientific truth. It's not the good life as it was before, divine truth, and to think God's thoughts after him, as Copernicus or Kepler would tell us about. Now the purpose is social justice.
Mhm.
Even atheists like Jonathan Haidt, a New York Times bestseller, NYU professor of psychology, a bestseller over multiple books. I remember 5 years ago, he gave a lecture at Duke University where he said, we are at a juncture in time in the universities where we must choose. Either we are going to have truth universities or
Mhm.
social justice universities. We cannot do both. And in his view of truth, he was just thinking scientific truth because he was part of the first Revolutionary Guard. Now, as a Jewish atheist, now he's been kicked out or being kicked out in the process of it, his kind, because it is the social justice, the DIE cult over meritocracy, the my truth over the truth,
Mhm.
criminals over victims, transgender women over women,
Mhm.
drug addicts over children playing, in the parks. Pedophiles don't call them that anymore. Minor attracted persons over the safety of children. Uh, we're in this new social justice movement. What they've done, unlike this dry, sciencey stuff like the first Revolutionary Guard, these guys have focused now on the sentiments, on the emotions, on empathy. Empathy. And we are told that empathy is somehow a virtue, and they guilt manipulate us. We're catching on to this, and now we have books reacting to it, like Toxic Empathy or The Sin of Empathy, or Gad Saad's, again another Jewish atheist, book that just came out. I just got my copy yesterday, on suicidal empathy. And I don't even think that, as a moral philosopher and someone who did his dissertation work on Aristotle and the virtues, I don't think empathy even is a virtue. It's a way of knowing. It's part of epistemology. In none of the classics of virtue lists does it make the cut. And there's more. Yeah.
Let me ask you this though. So when a parent is, I mean, they're not a philosopher, they're not an ethicist, like they're, just doing their thing as a parent, they're working their 9 to 5, they're coming home. Kid is either, I mean, at this point, it doesn't matter if they're in Christian school or public school most times, but they recognize the shift happening in the lower grades. We're not talking about in academia. We're not talking about, in the higher institutions. We're talking about, like, my kid's in 4th grade.
So you're talking about the shift from truth to social justice.
Well, I'm looking at the whole picture when you're talking about the repurposing, and yes, we're moving from truth to social justice. When the university has been repurposed, what does that, in like the most basic of layman's terms, really look like for that parent? What are they noticing or what is it that they should be watching out for?
I mean, as Nietzsche understood, he was one of the maybe first critical thinking philosophers in the early years of critical theory. Nietzsche talked about how God is dead and we have killed him. Now what will we do? And then you get others that are very honest about that, like Peter Singer. I was just lecturing at Princeton back in February. I've talked with Peter Singer. I've almost hosted a debate with him. And his book is so honest, The Unsanctifying of Human Life. And that is, if there is no such thing as God, the sanctifier of human life, then there is no such thing as the sanctity of human life. God is that ground in Western civilization, that grounded truth, that grounded logic, that grounded love, that grounded morality. We have now ripped that hub completely out of the will, and you've got these spokes just banging back and forth against one another, and it's each man, or rather each collective, to themselves, and it's group power now. It's identity politics. The ultimate problem at the reality level of human relations in these social binaries is social oppression, haves and have-nots, black versus white, male and female, cis and trans, rich and poor. And the way you know about that is through having been one of the oppressed. Now you get exalted and platformed because you have eyes that open. Those are called woke eyes. That's a knowledge category. That's where empathy comes in. Only those who can feel that oppression. Then what is the solution? Well, based on the corresponding problem, social oppression, the solution is social liberation or social justice. There's no absolute truth. There's just power. And this whole new revolution is a sticky ball of contradictory wax, but it doesn't matter. It's not about objective truth. It's about coming in, manipulating the heartstrings of people, and doing it in a collectivist, almost universalist voice at the highest levels. How could these people at Harvard, all with double and triple PhDs, how could they be wrong? Clearly, they know more than what grandpa and grandma know, or mom and dad. And so they come home and say, Mom and Dad, I've learned from the brightest of the brightest. Would you rather have a living son or a dead daughter? You choose. So the kid has already been indoctrinated, and it begins through the empath, the new way of knowing, and they haven't been taught critical thinking skills. And this comes back to the earlier days that you're talking about. We've got a real problem in our society in the K through 12s. Well, why do we think it starts in the K through 12s? Where did the K through 12 teachers get their education? My daughter is an elementary ed major. She was subbing today. She's a junior at one of the more conservative public universities, Purdue University, where my headquarters is next to. The same place that I lost my first PhD in my 5th year because I was told I had too much of a faith perspective, and yet it's one of the more conservative of public universities. And I look at all of her syllabi. She's in the College of Education. She's going to be teaching 3rd graders. Suppose she didn't have a father that has 4 graduate degrees and sniffs this stuff out daily. What is she going to teach when she goes not into the public school, into 3rd grade, but into the private Jesus school, 3rd grade, to teach? She's going to be bringing this pseudo-Christian cult called Marxism with her. She's not going to know any different. I see it in her syllabi. And she's being taught it by the professors in the colleges of education that they've targeted. And most parents, most grandparents don't have a clue that that's going on. They don't have a clue how bad this has become. But if you're going to be a medical doctor, you have to go through medical school. You can't just be homeschooled. If you're going to be a teacher, you have to get credentialed. And this is why I keep telling people, we cannot run. We cannot go into our closets. They're coming into our closets, into our churches. We've got cell phones now. We have to be ready and prepared for the majority of us who are not going back into university to deal with this ideological poison coming down so that we can do our God-given requirement as parents, and that is train the child in the way they should go so that when they get older, they won't get conscripted to work for the other side, because that's exactly what's happening now. And even our Christian kids who are now getting their education degrees and going and teaching in the Christian schools, they're bringing it with them. And the professors who are getting hired at Biola and coming from, say, Harvard or Princeton and Yale, because you don't want to, you want to impress people at the wine and cheese parties and not just say, oh, my professors came from this or that seminary. So you get them from these institutions, and everybody who has a PhD has a doctor of philosophy, even if they've never taken a philosophy class. So all of these people are sucking in this new ideological revolution. And we've only had 2 in the last 4 centuries since we started the universities. This is one of them. And most people just don't have a clue what's going on. And that's why in part why I wrote the book, so that we could figure out what just happened to America. This is no longer grandma's America. Look no further than the universities. Well, didn't we start those? Yes. And here's how we lost them. Well, what can we do about it? And so I give a roadmap going forward.
Yes, and all that you're saying, a lot of what I think about is the teacher who does not have the father at home, like imparting, oh no, this is, cultural Marxism, or this is a contemporary critical theory. And without that, just using the education that they've received, sometimes at their Biola, sometimes at their UC Santa Barbara, that education, they are now in the classroom teaching that math is racist, or that we have to have equity in math, or that, the equity statements on our, school district website, that push a trans ideology, or that encourage allyship statements from students. These are things that parents really can be looking for. What are the things that your child is being taught that is more in alignment with social justice than biblical truth? And the one thing that does stick out to me a lot is that allyship statement. How are we creating allies at the lower level of education. But that comes because there is a way in which teachers are taught in teacher school that they need to start enforcing equity, that we need to support a person's personal truth versus objective truth. These are the ways that parents can really see and understand when this ideology, this progressive miseducation ideology, is sitting in their child's classroom.
And I'm also thinking that that possibly accounts for why we're seeing these terribly low literacy skills and math skills, is because we're so busy pumping out social justice warriors. We're not teaching the truth. We're not teaching just even the most basic things. I want to have Corey react to all of that. When we come back, we're going to take a quick break from this episode to tell you about our new mentoring program that's coming this fall through the Center for Biblical Unity, the Ambassadors for Biblical Justice. Here's our friend Kevin Briggins to tell you more about the program.
Injustice is all around us. It can leave us feeling helpless and in despair. Can one person really make a difference and push back against the darkness? At the Center for Biblical Unity, we're passionate about equipping Christians to tackle today's cultural challenges through a distinctly biblical worldview. That is why we are launching the Ambassadors for Biblical Justice cohort. This 9-month mentoring program will walk you through the vital and practical tools you need to make a real difference in your community. Maybe you're a mother of a special needs child who has a heart to reach out to other special needs children in your local church. Or maybe you're a pastor who wants to more effectively address poverty in your community. Or maybe you're a businessman who wants to connect the dots between your vocation and your worldview. Whoever you are, if you have a heart for justice and want to explore how it aligns with the historic Christian faith, this program is for you. We are now accepting applications for our inaugural 2026 cohort. You will be mentored by seasoned Christian leaders who will help you apply biblical principles to real-world issues of justice, poverty, and cultural renewal. For more information, please visit centerforbiblicalunity.com/ambassador. Come be a part of our effort to change the world one life at a time.
And once again, I want to let everyone know that we're accepting applications now for the Ambassadors for Biblical Justice program. You can find out more information on our website at centerforbiblicalunity.com.
Awesome.
So, Corey, I'm thinking that often Christian parents feel torn between these two competing impulses of protecting their children from these worldly influences, from this shift that's happening in our education system, versus preparing them to engage with the culture as missionaries. And it's tricky because there's differences, I think, even in how to approach that with children versus young people. And, you know, when I'm sending my young person off to college, I'm investing my money, and yet, you know, I might not get a good return on that investment. It's all very conflicting. But I don't know, just what thoughts do you have, or what counsel might you give to Christian parents helping to navigate this tension between protection and exposure?
Yeah, I mean, instead of protecting them, how about inoculating them?
Mm-hmm.
Bankers talk about how to recognize counterfeits is that you focus so much on what the dollar is that you can more easily recognize the counterfeit when it comes about. Another thought is that, you need, for people who believe in the flu vaccine, for example, or certain vaccines. Now, I know we've gone through a tough era with that with respect to political science instead of just science in 2020. But, the idea there is that you expose, you inoculate by giving them a little bit of the flu virus to go out there and be ready for these things, these pathogens to come in and so forth. I don't think we want to just, from 0 to 60, send them out to the lion's den. So there might be a graduated process in which we do the inoculating, in which we do the educating, in which we teach them not just impart knowledge, but skills, critical thinking skills as well. You don't send a 2-year-old as a missionary. They're too young for that. You probably don't send a 6-year-old as a missionary. Doesn't mean they can't have an impact, but how long lasting? Maybe, a 12-year-old and certainly a 16-year-old. But what I tried to do, and I'm not saying I was the best parent, but I will say all 3 of my kids are following the Lord right now. They've all taken ownership, is that we graduated them into the process. We started out maybe in Christian schools, but when they got older, I wanted to give them a little leash and allow them to get a little bit of that flu virus inoculated and go into the public schools so that they're a little bit more prepared and then a lot more prepared maybe when they're in high school, so that they're now rubbing off of their peers who have got parents that have different worldviews than mine, and they're teaching it to their kids, and now all the friends are going back and forth together, because pretty soon they're going to go off to college and I'm not going to be the one there anymore. They need to be prepared when they leave here, and it can't be sheltered and then send them right out into the lion's den. They're going to get eaten up. That's what's going to happen. That is what is happening. So I think people need to realize too, they're so scared and thinking that they can just put their kids in a cloister. You can't do that. Look, let me explain something in terms of the educational forms that have come through. When this second revolution was happening, these revolutionaries like Antonio Gramsci in Italy, who never got out of prison, but his prison notes got mediated into the English-speaking world, right here in Indiana, in my state, at a religious school, Notre Dame, by a Marxist professor named Joseph Buttigieg, father of Mayor Pete. This is cultural Marxism that got mediated to the English-speaking world from Notre Dame, not from Harvard or Berkeley. And Gramsci and his followers talked about cultural Marxism and talked about what one of the Frankfurt School theorists who took the ball and ran with it, Marcuse, discussed, and that was the long march through the institutions. What was significant about the West that was not the case with the East was fully open to a frontal assault like the Russian and Chinese revolutions. But they could never do it in the West, not in Europe, not in America. And the reason is because the soft tissue of culture, what Gramsci referred to as civil society, was made up of this stuff like a living tissue. Every time you would lob shells at it, it would self-regenerate. And so until we got into the soft tissue, the institutions like academia, media, and ecclesia, church, it would never be ready for a frontal assault, a full-on Marxist revolution. Now, look at where they've come from. They have gone through, starting in the humanities and social sciences, and then through DIE, or sometimes called DEI programs, they jumped tracks into the hard sciences, into medicine, into mathematics, into engineering, and then all of them poured out into the corporate world and into media. It doesn't have to be CNN now. It's Instagram. That's media. It doesn't have to be NBC or MSNBC. It's Twitter now, or whatever your social media chain is. Everybody's on social media. It's in academia, media, and ecclesia. It's in our churches, it's in our campus ministries, it's in our seminaries, in our Christian academic societies, and I can explain how it went into all those institutions. But ecclesia is the gathering. Well, these kids have their gatherings. They're no longer in youth groups, they're no longer churched kids. They still have their communities. And the education is being thrust through there, whether K through 12, whether through Instagram, even before they get to college, so that they're ready for the guide of the perplexed, for Maimonides. They're already inclined. And now the philosophers in these universities come along and give them the new rationale, strengthening what they've already been taught in these media and ecclesia type communities, so that now they are fully equipped coming out of universities, being the leaders, the political leaders, the business leaders, the politicians, and so forth. So that America, the West, this is a civilizational disruption. It is a civilizational revolution. This is a revolution that we are in. This stuff is happening, and parents cannot avoid it. Grandparents can't avoid it. Pastors can't avoid it. We need to prepare our flocks, our friends, and our families for this by giving them, first of all, the real dollar bill, enough so they can recognize the counterfeit, but then imparting real education, the knowledge and the critical thinking skills, also by giving them immune shots, a little bit of the flu shot, inoculating them against some of this stuff, because they need to be able to have experienced it a little bit to see what it is so they can recognize it. Once you see it, you can't not see it. And I know you guys know this because you've been harping on this for a long time, and a lot of your listeners know it, but there's a gradual process that people are coming to know these things. We have got to be equipping them. And so there are a few people, a few ministries like Ratio Christi that are going back into the universities, that have a game plan for a 40 or 50 year takeover of the universities again. And by God's grace, if the funding keeps coming in and the right people come in, we have a game plan for this, and we're taking clues from how the Marxists did it. But the vast majority of people listening to this program, our friends, our family, they're not going to be going back into the university, but they still need to prepare their families, their flocks, their friends, their neighbors, their coworkers, because everyone is playing in Vegas right now. Everyone's a gambler. It's going to be on black or red. You cannot not play in this game. Mm-hmm. And this is a game of life. It's a game of civilization. Right. And we are in a cultural revolution.
I'm so glad that you went back to the Frankfurt School, and they're looking at Marx and where Marx fell short in his theory and his approach, and what they thought would actually be the better approach, and getting into culture and looking at media, and like who those key players were when you talk about someone like Gramsci, or when you look at Adorno or Marcuse, it wasn't by accident. And I think it's so important for people to understand, like the revolution that we're in, the cultural moment that we're in, is a moment 100 years in the making. It's not just, we woke up and we stumbled across this and, now here we are. No, this is literally almost, I want to say almost to the day, like 100 years in the making. Yeah. And so here we are. And yet what I love about Ratio Christi, what I love about you and how you approach the conversation, and others like you, Neil Shinvey, Pat Sawyer, like when I think about this conversation, we don't just have to sit back. I don't have to, just accept this is the way it is and the revolution's going to happen and I'm just going to be a victim of it. But I think people do need to know what cultural engagement can look like. And so as we wrap up, I really would like you to leave us with some clues or some tips as to what cultural engagement can look like, whether you're a parent, a grandparent. Normally when we talk about education things and kid things, people tend to think we're talking to parents only, but it's grandparents, it's aunts and uncles, kids, it's pastors, it's youth leaders, it's teachers, who are historically Christian and not progressive. What does cultural engagement and prep really look like?
I've got a lot of concerns with cultural engagement. I was with a group of Christian leaders, thought leaders globally for 2 days recently, and it was on engagement. And then I started to see that, wow, some of these guys, they're on the other side, and yet we're in the same halls together. Again, another reason why our people need to know what they believe and why they believe it. I think the first thing first, 101, Christianity 101, we need to start following Jesus again. We need to repent. What do I mean by that? Well, when Jesus was accosted by the Pharisees and Sadducees, and they said, "We're pretty impressed by you. What is the greatest command?" Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. That was a command. One of the greatest command, right? He said, what is it? Love God with all your mind. The purpose of life is to know God. We have excommunicated the life of the mind, the scandal of the evangelical mind for the last century, and we've exhibited only the hands and the heart of Christ. But without the head of Christ, it's no wonder this new revolutionary guard has come in through the sentiments, the heartstrings, and they've manipulated the Christian moms and the Christian pastors and ministers and so forth. They've gotten right into the sanctuaries. The barbarians no longer at the gates, they're in the citadel. We need to repent, start following Jesus again, and be prepared to give an answer for the reason, for the hope that's in us, and do it with gentleness and respect. There we have the fully integrated Christian, not Humpty Dumpty, crashed and disintegrated, but the head, the heart, and the hands. And then the Christian goes in and realizes, okay, who is my audience if I'm going to do cultural engagement? Is it the Jew in the synagogue? Well, then I'll bring the scripture and I'll prove to them that Jesus is the Messiah. That's what Paul did. Or if it's the Greek, he goes out into Mars Hill in Athens and he has the word of God, but right here and right here. Sometimes it's not even legal to be bringing the Bible into your workplace, but you have it right here. But you need to be fluid with it. You need to be conversational. You need to know who your audience is. If you're going to do missions in Saudi Arabia, you study Islam. If in India, you study Hinduism. If in Utah, you study Mormonism. If you're going to send your kids into the university or into Instagram and into our culture, you need to understand what cultural moment we are in. Mm-hmm. And so even in the field of apologetics, some people have gotten it and they're calling it cultural apologetics, but even those who write books on this still don't get it. You can't do adequate cultural apologetics if you don't adequately understand what cultural Marxism is. We're not in Richard Dawkins' zone anymore of naturalism and fighting those fights. This is a different moment. And I think what we're looking at on the horizon right now, and I've mentioned it and I've given clues to it, empathy. We need to be thinking, and this is part of the art of persuasion that Aristotle mentioned, the logos, ethos, and pathos. Pathos, empathy, sympathy. We're looking at the feminization, the demographic feminization of our universities. They now outnumber boys easily, and that demographic shift is growing as undergrads, grads, PhDs, assistant professors, and in the next 10 years, women will be the dominant force among full professors and university presidents. That's just the demographic. I've said nothing about the ideology of feminization. But that comes along with something. Everybody knows that, the insensitive male on a bad day, that strength of the insensitive male is sometimes he can be more stable. He's just sort of even keel. Women, it's known on all hands, they tend to be more caring. They're the caretakers of the children. They from birth, the baby knows the mother. It feels the mother on the mother's breast. There's just this hormonal, this natural connection for the bio connection, even greater than adoptees. But women also, on their weak point, what is their strength is also the weakness, and that is sometimes they're given over to some of these emotional suspect philosophies that come in, and sometimes we're not able to see it. And that's what we're seeing is this ideological shift along with the demographic shift at the highest levels in all of the disciplines. And I think we need to recognize that. And, I'm developing a talk titled How to Win Women and Influence People, right? How to win friends and influence people. Because even in Ratio Christi, the majority of our people that are part of our groups are males. And yet the majority of people on the campuses are females. How do we start winning the females on the campus? And how do we start winning the female professors, right? And how do we start preparing for this? I mean, there's so many layers to this, just the demographic. When Christians are going to university and more females than males, those females are going to want to get degrees. And when they get degrees, they'll want to get maybe graduate degrees. And by that time, you don't want to waste all your time getting degrees. You want to get a job and you want to get a career and then get married. And then when you're 54 years old, you want to maybe have a baby, right? And
Absolutely
so
not.
they're going to be the breadwinners. And the guy who's out here and just went into plumbing as soon as he got out of high school, she's not going to want to stoop down. This is a pastoral problem in the church, right? What are we going to do about this whole thing? But I think we all need to be collectively thinking about not just the philosophy coming through, because I will say on this Marxist philosophy, feminism was the beginning of this. And even this notion of intersectionality and so forth, or standpoint theory that we find in wokeness, it began in second wave feminism with Sandra Harding, who said she got it from Marx, right?
Mhm.
But even going back to, we talk about the Supreme Court today, right? Clarence Thomas, we all remember, some of us remember Anita Hill and the Believe Women and trying to get Clarence Thomas ousted. He was the Brett Kavanaugh of that day.
I think Monique was only 12 when that happened.
Well, a lot of people don't
I remember.
realize one of the attorneys of Anita Hill, who was the one who coined the expression intersectionality, who was one of the founders of critical race theory,
I think it was Derek
Kimberly
Kimberly
Crenshaw.
Kimberly Crenshaw, yeah.
She was one of the attorneys.
Mhm.
So this stuff goes deep back then, and I think it's still it is one of the issues that we've not really tackled much, but we need to be thinking about this issue of empathy. We need to be thinking about how to do persuasion in the turf where we're at, not in the synagogues, but out in the marketplace. How do we adjust our apologetic argumentation, not just to resonate with logos or logic, but ethos and pathos? How do we do that? Because right now, the other side uses pathos against us. They manipulate us. They guilt trip us. Mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, would you rather have a dead son or a living daughter? Why do you hate gays? Hate or celebrate, right? Why do you call them illegal? There are no illegal people. They're undocumented. God loves all his children. And the average Christian just goes blah, 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 blah,
Ooh-wee.
and then capitulates,
Mhm.
right? But there is a Trojan horse coming in with all of that. And because we're not to think critically, we're taught instead to adopt critical theory. We just train the child up in the way they should go, and when they get older, they get conscripted to work through the other side, for the other side. So I think, just addressing this issue of empathy, a way of thinking, who's thinking that way, how do we address that sort of thinking? How is it that it is the other side, a false bad ideology is using it to manipulate the church, who is the ground of real pathos? We have to address those issues, but that's another issue.
Well, once again, I want to let people know about Corey's book, The Progressive Miseducation of America. You can get it right now wherever books are sold, available through Harvest House. And also you can check to see if there is a Ratio Christi chapter near you that maybe you want to help volunteer or provide support for, or financial support for the missionaries in your area. Maybe you want to start a Ratio Christi chapter, or see if there is one near your child's college, or where they're thinking of going. It's a wonderful alternative to more progressive leaning campus ministries that have been captured in recent years. You can also check out Corey's speaking ministry, drcorey.miller.com, and he is available for speaking on these ideas for your group. Thanks for joining us, Corey. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much. It's been good.
Go team, go God.
Yeah. Take care. We'll see you soon.
See ya.
All right. Dr. Corey Miller, ladies and gentlemen.
So much information, and
Man, the guy's like a freaky encyclopedia.
I know, like it's so, but the book is so good. The book is so good, and it's so helpful because of just how he links all of everything that he said and brings it, from even before the Frankfurt School through to today. And what does tomorrow look like if we participate and if we don't?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's it.
So next week on the show, it's just going to be you and me, and I'll be back at home. You'll be here in the wonderful warm state of Arizona, and you have got a really interesting topic planned for us to talk about.
We are going to talk about adultism or childism.
It's one of the isms.
It's one of the isms, yes. And like all of the other isms, it needs to be investigated before you make the claim.
So the claim is that children are an oppressed group and adults are the oppressors.
Yes.
And some of those adults could be parents.
Most of the adults are our parents. But part of why I wanted to talk about it was because of a reaction video I did last week before. And someone sent in some information on adultism. It's something I have been reading on and researching, but didn't really plan on talking about it publicly. And then
you've been reading about it on your own for a couple of years and reading the literature and trying to familiarize yourself, because it's really just another one of the critical theories. And we're doing all the critical theories here at Center for Biblical Unity. So
what do we do when, your child is seen as an oppressed person, and when discipline is seen as oppressive? And, varying people can say varying degrees of discipline would be oppressive. And so you might be a gentle parenter. But even in that framework, there can be levels of oppression to children based on which, model you uphold. And so I think it's worth having the conversation simply because we want to have clarity on who actually gets to raise our kids.
So if you're curious in the meantime, during the week, if you want to catch a replay of our conversation with our friend Aaron Kunkel from a year ago, we did a whole show about gentle parenting, and we had just barely touched on critical child theory and childism, but adultism. But this will be an expanded conversation. But if you want to catch that on the replay, you can do that. I'll try to remember to link it in the description on YouTube. So. Yes. In the meantime, make sure to get in your application for the Ambassadors for Biblical Justice program and check out all the things that we have happening at the Center for Biblical Unity. The best way to stay in touch with us, download the CFBU mobile app onto your device. You can get all of our streams right there in the palm of your hand across all of our platforms. And also make sure you're signed up for our weekly digital newsletter. Someday you could log into social media and not be able to see our posts, or we could get thrown off YouTube or social media. But the one way that you can stay in touch with us and make sure that you are connected is by signing up on our website at centerforbiblicalunity.com and get our weekly digital newsletter.
Before we go, something fun. Julie M8603 said, I'm going to miss it now, but I'll sum it up. Oh, she says, no question, but I saw you guys at church yesterday and didn't say hi because I didn't want to bother you, but I should have, just to say I love you guys. Oh, you should have come up. We are always just open, like, hey, just for. Now, I'm not going to mention the name of the church because we've done that before, and then, people just show up. But no, you should go to your own church. And if you ever see us out and about or see us at church, please,
or the airport,
come over and say hi. We love it. And so Julie 8603, I will expect to see you next week, hopefully, if the Lord says the same. All right, guys. And with that, we are out.
Grace and peace, everybody.
Bye.
There's nothing left.